So this is AP World History, Chapter 8, The Unification of China. So today we're really going to focus on the isms, or which could be considered the search for political and social order. And you see this through the isms like Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. So it's really important that you understand the concepts that each of them are and how they were applied to China. So let's get started with Confucianism. So it really starts with the leader of Confucianism, who is Confucius, or his actual name is Kongfuzi, and he was considered the master philosopher Kong, or that's what they called him, what his disciples called him. So he comes from actually a wealthy family, an aristocratic family. So that meant that he had money, and he knew not what he was talking about, but he knew a certain social behavior. And he was unwilling to compromise those principles, to compromise that kind of behavior. He had a decade where he just was unemployed and he was just wandering and kind of coming up with these ideas. When he returned home, though, he was considered a failure because it seemed that he really didn't do much with his life, and soon he died after that. So he wrote a book called the Analects, and in these Analects we see these Confucian ideas, and these are really what you kind of need to know about Confucianism. So it's the idea that you have ethics in politics, and that you're gonna avoid religion, and that's really what Confucius did. He really didn't care about having this philosophical thought that could not be applied to the real world. For him, everything he came up with was something that you could apply to actual life. It wasn't just, having these ideas and thinking about them and, never applying them. They weren't metaphysical. In fact, they were more applicable again to this real life. So he said he had something called the junzi, or this was considered to him to be the superior individual, and this person would take a role in public affairs and would not allow the personal interest to influence their judgment. So highly ethical person, and that they would be in some sort of government role. So there's an emphasis on the Zhao dynasty text, and that's where he kind of tries to pull a lot of his stuff from. And it's later going to form the core text for Chinese education. Confucianism, you're going to see this later on in the other dynasties after this time period. So it's really important because this will be a long-lasting contribution to the Chinese culture. So the values of Confucianism, one of the main ones is Ren, and that is just that you're kind, you're benevolent. He says that this is what you need in the government. So he says that, these are individuals that are courteous, respectful, and diligent. These are the things that you should find in the government, is what he argues. The next value is Li. Again, the idea of courtesy and respect, especially to your elders. And the last one kind of goes along with Li, which is Zhao, which is filial piety. And that's essentially pretty much saying that you're going to respect the social hierarchy that's in your family, meaning that the son is going to respect the father. The father is going to respect their father. The son is going to respect the grandfather. So it was kind of the respect in that social hierarchical sense. So traits will lead to the development of a junzi. So all these, the Ren, the Li, the Zhao, this is going to help create that superior individual, and that these are going to be ideal leaders. The other thing you really have to understand about this idea of the Confucian values that you see here is that you need to apply them to a larger level. I just spoke to you about the family level, but you need to think, okay, this also applies to the subject and emperor kind of relationship. So there were 5 principal relationships, like I just mentioned: the ruler to the subject, the father to the son, the husband to the wife, and the older brother to the younger brother. So as the subject, you're going to, follow the ruler. As the son, you're going to adhere to the father. As the wife, you're going to adhere to your husband. And as the younger brother, you're going to adhere to your older brother, and the same thing. if you're a younger friend, you're going to listen to the older friend. So that it was kind of that, social kind of hierarchy where this is the relationships that we have. And if we maintain this order, then it will produce, political and social stability. So the organizing principles, as you saw, were status, age, and gender. Okay. Your position was going to determine that relationship. Your age was going to determine how a relationship worked. And of course, the gender was going to determine the relationship. So this is just a Confucian temple complex. You probably have seen some of these in other pictures or when you studied geography. This is what they look like. In Khufu, this is the Confucius' tomb in the city of Shandong province of China. So Confucius also had followers. One of them was Mencius. He was a principal Confucian scholar, and he was very optimistic and believed in the power of Ren, of being kind and nice and benevolent. He was not really influential during his time, but he was considered the prime exponent of Confucian thought since the 10th century. So he really didn't play a governmental role necessarily. However, the next follower of Confucius, Zhuangzi, he actually was a part of the government and he tried to implement these Confucian ideas in the government. So he was a career was as a government administrator. You had this belief in fundamental selfishness of humanity, but when you compare it with Mencius, he said, you know what, if we apply this Confucian idea, then we can better ourselves. And he was big on the emphasis of Li. Okay, so just keep those in mind. The Ren, the Li, the Zhao. The Li was the proper behavior. That you behave properly, there's rigid propriety, and that this is going to help produce a better government. He also believed in the limits on individual interests and punishments for those who neglected their obligations to the larger society. So, the idea that you have to recognize the importance of the role you play, especially in the larger society. Again, these Confucian values, yes, they're applied in the familial sense, but as you saw as the 5 principal relationships, it's also applicable to the larger world. So, that's just one of the isms. The next one is Taoism. So Taoism is a little different from, not a little, but probably a lot different from Confucianism in that it's a critic of Confucianism. It's more passive. The rejection of active attempts to change the course of events, meaning that it's more of a kind of go with the flow ideology, right? It's whereas Confucianism is like strict behavior, strict order. This is how you behave depending on who you are, on your status. Um, you have to be kind. You have to be, benevolent. You have to behave a certain way. You have to show filial piety. This was pretty much different. This was, again, more passive. The founder was considered lousy, although they probably think it was a bunch of different people who contributed to the development of it, of the Dao Zhang, which is the classic of Way and the Virtue, the book, pretty much for the Taoism. So they named Zhuangzi is named for the author. So the Tao, like I said, is the way. The Tao is known as the way of nature of the cosmos. Um, they use the example of water, saying that it's soft and yielding but capable of eroding rock, meaning that there is almost that yin and yang where something can be very gentle but at the same time, have a harsh impact. And then you have, it also will use example of the cavity of pots and wills, non-existent but essential. So the doctrine of Wu Wei, this is the attempt to control the universe results in chaos, meaning that we're not supposed to control the events that are happening. We're just kind of supposed to be going with the flow and allowing it to happen. That you restore order by disengagement, meaning don't try to change it, don't try to control things. There's no advance in education, there's no ambition. It's very much big on simple living in harmony with nature. That if we're going to be Taoists, we need to live in harmony with nature. We need to let things take its course. We need to just take a step back from the control that we want. And you also see this idea of cultivating self-knowledge, kind of through that the harmoniousness of nature and yourself. Um, so whenever you see kind of like nature scenes and being a part of nature in Chinese, that usually has to do with Taoism. So the Tao, to escape the social, political, and cultural traps of life, one must escape by one rejecting formal knowledge and learning, pretty much saying, "What do we know?" Everything we know is what we see around us in nature. Relying on the senses and your instincts again, letting go of kind of that formal idea of what's being taught to you, and then discovering the nature and rhythm of the universe. So, kind of very, holistic and natural in that sense, and ignoring a political and social law. They're not saying that you're going to go and, rebel, but what they're saying is that um, you need to just kind of take the course that is being led to you in a way. So Tao is the universe of opposites. Find the balance, kind of like what they gave you that example. The yin is considered the feminine, the positive, the darkness, the cold, the weak, the earth. So it's all these good, but then at the same time you have all this negative. And then you have the yang, which is the masculine, the active, the light, the warmth, the strength, the heaven, the sun. So these opposites are in there. And in every yin, there's some yang. And in every yang, there's some yin. So again, it's very natural, the idea of Taoism. So, in terms of this belief, this ideology, what are the political implications? One, Confucianism is the public doctrine, meaning that people are following Confucianism in China more so than Taoism. If you're going to be a Taoist, it's something that you're probably going to practice in private. Okay, you're not going to go around promoting your Taoist ways because they don't create that political and social stability that China is looking for. Um, so it's an ironic combination which allowed intellectuals to pursue both. So a lot of the times people lived these not double lives, but tried to marry the two, meaning outside of here with my family, I'm going to be this strict kind of rigid following, but I'm also going to remember that nature has to take its course and things have to go a certain way. So it's very interesting how these two kind of are opposite of each other, but people would try to make them blend together. All right, so the next ism is called legalism. So, legal, you should think laws, and it's pretty much what it was, all right? A system of laws or an ideology of laws. So, the major legalist principles that we are naturally selfish as humans. Humans are naturally selfish, and intellectualism and literacy is discouraged because that means then that we will not adhere to strict laws and that we will question what's happening. So it's the argument that law is the supreme authority and replaces morality, meaning that law is going to replace the good and the bad. The law is going to enforce things. And then, of course, the ruler must rule with a strong punishing hand. So if something goes wrong, you must, use the law and the military and the strength to fix it. And again, war is a means of strengthening a ruler's power. So, this is could be considered a very harsh ideology, but at the same time, it's going to put people in place. So you see this emphasis on the development of the state, the ruthless, very ruthless, but it's the idea that the end is going to justify the means, meaning we have to do this if we want to reach our goal. The role of law, that there's strict punishment for violators. So if you're going to do something bad, do something wrong, then you're going to be punished for it, severely probably. And this is also the idea that it's trying to prevent you from doing these bad things. In addition, you have this idea of collective responsibility, where, if you're a family, you need to watch out for each other and make sure you're not, doing the wrong choices. So Han Fazi, this was a supporter of legalism, and he was forced to commit suicide by his political enemies. Um, so a lot of people didn't necessarily agree with legalism, but it's something they used in the Chinese dynasty. Shang Yang, he wrote the book of the Lord Shang, and he was despised and feared because of his ruthlessness, because of his promotion of the legalist doctrine. And then still continued with Han Fazi. Just remember, he was advisor to the king court, and like I said, forced to commit suicide by the political enemies. So the legalist doctrine, when it was enforced in China, two strengths that the state said they had. One was agriculture, one was military, and they emphasized the development of the peasants and the soldier classes through this doctrine. Using the peasants for public works, you didn't want to do it. Well, there was going to be punishment for that. Um, of course, again, there's this distrust of pure intellectual and cultural pursuits, meaning that that's not important right now. What's important is to strengthen our agriculture and to strengthen our military. And then historically, it's often imitated but rarely praised, meaning that in Chinese society, even today, even after the legalism idea leaves, it's not something that they praise. It's not something that they're proud of that they did, that this was one of the ideologies that they created. All right, so the next time we'll look at the unification of China. Your big takeaways for this one should obviously be all the isms. It's super important that you know the difference between them. Just remember, Confucianism, that is kind of like strict political and social behavior, that you need to be kind and you need to be generous, but at the same time, you need to behave a certain way. And with that, you should have filial piety, meaning that you know your role and your relationship between you and the person in your family, which also leads to the five principal relationships you see between ruler subject, father son, husband wife, younger brother, older friend, younger friend. These are just principal relationships that exist. But it was believed that if you practice Confucianism, it was going to create that political stability. Taoism, it's more, I like to think of it as more like a hippie kind of ideology, because it's all about going with the course of nature and going with the flow and not to have such an impact on nature. And then of course legalism, you should just hear it in the word itself. Legal laws, very strict ideology where they're going to use punishment to enforce their rule. And then they use it obviously to enforce the military and to strengthen agriculture. So next time we're going to look at the unification of China. We'll look at the Qin dynasty and the Han dynasty.